next speaker is Rick Mandler, who's been working with ABC in the States, and before that, other broadcasters, including Disney, and very much in a strategic and digital media type role, so very much part of this new world which TV is now well and truly part of. He's also, I've never heard this title before, but he's adjunct professor, is that right? Adjunct professor at New York University's Stern Business School. So obviously he knows a lot about the academic side of things as well as the business side of things. But I'd like to invite Rick onto the stage to talk to us about how television has been undervalued while digital reaps the rewards.
Okay. Boy, coming at the end, I think you'll hear echoes of some of the earlier presentations today. I do not have a Churchill quote. I do not have an iceberg slide or the slide of the entire family on various screens. In fact, I have no slides at all. So pay attention. Here I am. And also just, these are my own thoughts. I'm not here today speaking on behalf of ABC or Disney. Okay. This talk has two parts. The first is a discussion about advertising, what works and why, and some of the sort of fundamentals of our business. And I think it's important to revisit those fundamentals because to a certain extent, I think we've forgotten them. Things that we have taken for granted have to be reproven, and that's okay. The proof is out there, and I'm going to share some of it today. The second part of the talk is about quality content and how quality content serves those fundamentals. And again, I think it's something that maybe we've lost a little bit of sight of, and it's important to reacquaint ourselves with that truth. Okay, I want to start off with a definition. I think everybody has been talking about this throughout the past 2 days. When I say TV, I really mean TV in all of its various forms. I really mean video. Quality, professionally produced video. Whether it's linear or on demand, sold by impressions or sold by ratings, it's all TV. So let's just use TV as an easy shorthand. First principles. Why do marketers advertise? To me, the answer is relatively self-evident. They advertise to stimulate demand. They advertise to generate sales. Whether that's short-term or long-term, it's still to stimulate sales. Whether it's direct marketing or a sale or a promotion to try and stimulate sales today, or whether it's brand advertising and try and stimulate sales over a longer period of time, at the end of the day, it comes down to stimulating sales. And I think it's important to filter everything we do through that lens because products and moving products and services is ultimately what we do. A few years ago, I attended a presentation by a very major marketer, top 5 global ad spend. And they did some analysis that they were very proud of on the return on investment of various advertising. What advertising stimulated the most sales per unit of expense. And they proudly told us that paid search had the highest ROI. So I'm a little bit of a troublemaker. I put my hand up when they asked for questions, and I said, why do people search? And they looked at me like, there was a strange thing to ask. And they said, what? And I said, why do people search? I can't believe they're born, they come out of the womb with an urge to go to Google and type in your brand. Why do they search? And they said, oh, well, they see our TV commercials. I was like, really? So let me ask you a question. What percentage of the ROI for paid search did you attribute to TV? And they said, none. I said, so aren't you undercounting TV ROI and overstating paid search ROI? And they conceded that they were, but they said it was hard to measure. So hard to measure is not impossible. And my colleagues at ABC, working with Accenture, who I think was here on Tuesday and maybe has been here throughout the conference, set about trying to prove that. The nice thing about working with Accenture is that they have such a large client base, they're able to aggregate both massive amounts of client expenditures on media with the actual sales data. So they took about $12 billion of sales, matched it up against media, 6 different categories, ran the math through and looked at the ROI, not just in the short term, but over 3 years as well. So here's what they found. The ROI for paid search was, in fact, the highest in the short term. But when you looked out over the course of 3 years, TV by far drove the highest ROI. TV generated 2.3 times greater incremental impact on sales than any other media. And that's a huge amount. And there's more. TV had a halo effect on the other media, right? Why did people search? Because they saw the TV ad, right? So TV actually made the other media work harder. So when you looked at the impact of cross-channel between TV and other digital media, the ROI of TV was understated by 10%, and the ROI of digital was overstated by 18%. Again, that's massive. And finally, because of the lingering impact of TV advertising, remember, 2.3 times greater sales over a 3-year period, there's lower diminishing returns on TV investment. TV drives the top of the funnel, and then digital activates at the lower end of the funnel. And our research showed that advertisers can hurt their overall sales by shifting dollars out of that bottom funnel out of the top funnel into the bottom funnel, out of TV and into digital. Okay, so TV works better, and it works better over time, but why? And I have a number of answers for you. First is the power of the creative, right? TV provides full screen, sight, sound, motion, emotion, captures the viewer's attention in a really powerful environment. It's not scrolling by in a feed. But secondly, TV emotionally engages the viewer. And an engaged viewer is more receptive to the advertising. ABC has done a fair amount of research on this, and what we've found is that the ROI goes up as the scores for emotional engagement go up. So the more emotionally engaged in a program a consumer is, a viewer is, the more receptive they are to and the more likely to purchase they are from the advertising. The same is true for perceived quality content. Quality ads in quality shows deliver a higher ROI than cheaper ads in less expensive shows. And this is this result sort of replicates some research that's been talked about on signaling. And the commentator Don Marti really does the most work on this. The idea of signaling is that people actually recognize that a show is expensive and that an ad in that show is expensive. And it has a subtle influence on their perception of the brand. They recognize that the brand is spending real money to put that ad in that show. It's a signal of quality. And that signal of quality drives sales and drives ROI. Okay, so most of this is kind of intuitive, but it's nice to have research. One more finding. There is something magical about a large audience. As the size of the audience of a show scales up, so does the ROI. It exceeds the increase in pricing for ads in that show. Think about that for a second, right? Really, what I'm saying is, and the research proves it, is that shows, I'm going to use North American examples, shows like the Academy Awards and the Super Bowl are bargains. Because the size of the audience that they delivers the highest ROI, notwithstanding the high unit costs and the high CPMs. There's an inverse insight from that, though, which is you don't get that large simultaneous audience on Facebook and Google. That's not what they offer. And it's one of the distinct advantages that TV brings to the table that I think is a little counterintuitive because, as Simon pointed out, the procurement department is often policing the CPMs. Okay. I want to explore that just a little more. I'm sure many of you are familiar, there's been references throughout the conference to the work of Byron Sharp, the book How Brands Grow, and the Aaron Burke Bass Institute. So Sharp demonstrates that consumers are not particularly brand loyal, and that one of the most important functions to advertising to consumers is to make sure that your brand is top of mind when they're making the purchase decision, when there's a bewildering amount of choice on the shelf and they have to go actually buy. In follow-up research, Sharp discovered that about half of a brand's purchasers purchase less than once a year. And that 40% of total sales happen from these light purchasers. So think about that for a second. 40% of sales come from ultra-light purchasers who buy a brand less than once a year. How do you reach them? You reach them with broad-based mass advertising. No one's going to target somebody who purchases less than once a year, right? They're not in Target. Yet those people account for 40% of sales. If you're a brand manager and you're trying to grow your brand, those are the places that you're going to focus on. And I think this speaks to one of the fundamental challenges of the future of our business, is finding the right balance between broad-based advertising and targeted advertising to optimize sales. Finding a way to reach those people who some would characterize as waste and other would characterize as future purchasers. Okay. There was a recent article in the New York Times about humor in insurance advertising. And it mentions almost in passing about how Geico, the American insurance company, went from about 2% market share to the number 2 insurer in North America. So how did Geico do that? They did it with broad-based mass reach advertising using humor with the same tagline from the dawn of creation until now, right? Everybody, I can tell you, everybody in the States knows the Geico tagline because they've been consistently using it forever. They didn't do it with personalized experiences, with data targeting. Sure, that's a part of how they convert people as they move through the funnel. But the top of the funnel is what drove their business. And that's exactly the strategy that Sharp recommends, and it's clearly working for at least them. So I suspect a number of you are thinking, well, that's all very nice, Rick. TV works, blah, blah, blah. But data is king, and TV is not data-driven, and so that's that. All right, so there's no question. Data-driven advertising is going to be a really important part of our future. And I totally get the allure of it from a buyer's perspective, right? John Moneymaker, the alleged founder of the department store, says, half of what I spend on advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. Right? And data presumably can tell us which half. Okay, but if Sharp is right, and if the sales growth comes from these ultralight purchasers, both halves are relevant. There isn't any waste. And this is the big difference between TV and Facebook and Google, right? Facebook, Google, they're about a data-driven, efficient, scaled offering. That's great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But they're not about mass reach associated with quality content with an emotionally engaged audience. That's what TV does best. Okay. I want to do a little, describe to you, David had said, mentioned I was an adjunct professor. It means I'm not a real professor. I'm an industry professional who comes in and teaches one class a semester. But to my students, I'm a real professor, and they take me very seriously, and I kind of like fooling them that way. So I asked them, just out of curiosity, how many people are familiar with the beer brand Corona? Okay, everybody, great, good. I didn't know if it was a global brand or not. So I asked my students how many of them are familiar with Corona, and they all put their hands up as you did. And then I say, so what's the brand message of Corona beer? And they almost all say, oh, chill out on the beach, right? You chill out on the beach. So I say, okay, great. How many of you actually drink Corona? And it's a class of 50, about 5 hands go up, which is roughly Corona's market share. And I said, okay, great. So if one of these 5 people shows up at a party with a 6-pack of Corona, what does it say about them? And they all say, they like to chill out on the beach. I'm like, okay. What if Corona's targeting their message only to those 5 likely purchasers? And they show up at the party with a 6-pack of Corona. What do you think of them now? So they resist the hypothetical. But eventually, they're forced to acknowledge, if they haven't seen the ads saying that Corona is the chill out on the beach beer, they don't think anything about the person who shows up with the 6-pack of Corona. And I think there's really something very profound about that, which is brands have meaning. And they have meaning about us. The brands we use says something about us. The car we drive, the clothes we wear, the phone we use, the beer we drink, it says something about us. But it only says something about us if everybody else knows what the message is. And this kind of goes back to why the Super Bowl and the Academy Awards are so powerful. Because if you're using a brand that's been advertised in the Super Bowl and the Academy Awards, you know everybody else knows what that says about you. And I think that's what we forget about when we start thinking about micro-targeting, data targeting. We forget how important the social component of a brand message is to everyone, not just the purchasers. Okay. So I think the mission of a brand manager today is to keep a brand top of mind with a well-defined message, consistent over a long period of time, so that they can pick up those ultralight purchasers and actually drive brand growth through broad, mass reach, emotionally engaging advertising. And then activate that message with data targeting, with interactive advertising, with all of the things that Facebook and Google do really well. And so what I'm really just saying is, this is a question of media mix. And maybe as an industry, we've overweighted a little bit in one direction, and it's time to rethink that. The other thing I want to talk about, though, is quality content, because all that research I mentioned earlier hinges on quality content, right? The quality of the show, the emotional engagement, everything else. Facebook and Google have a lot of things, but I think it's fair to say that what they don't have is a lot of quality content. Their value proposition is data. And data means privacy. All of this data that's collected about us is a semi-transparent transaction. We give up a little privacy in exchange for a free service. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think maybe the exchange could be a little more transparent, and as Simon mentioned, there's clearly some momentum behind regulations to push in that direction, and we'll see what happens. Less so in the States, interestingly enough. Some people less charitably refer to it as the surveillance economy. But I think it behooves us as marketers to think about our place in that ecosystem and how much privacy we're willing to demand of our customers in exchange for the ability to effectively market to them. And I think we should care about it for a number of reasons. All right, first, to the extent that there is greater regulation and or consumer backlash, those tools may be constrained, and if we were relying upon them to drive sales, we're going to have to do something else, right? That one's mostly self-evident. The second is there's possible brand blowback, right? Apple has done a pretty good job of trying to position themselves as the more privacy-friendly platform. To the extent that people start to care about privacy, to the extent that brands are less privacy sensitive, they may have a problem with their customers. So it's something to be sensitive to. And of course, it's hard not to read in the papers about data breaches. Uber, Equifax, I mean, every day there's another one. And so it does force the question of whether that exchange, a service in exchange for your private information, isn't in fact a fair one. The third is, as I talked about before, to the extent that we're using data to drive our marketing decisions, we may be avoiding those light purchasers who will help us increase sales. And then the last is the disconnection between content and advertising. And this last one is, it's a little policy-oriented, but I think it's worth thinking about. Right? We all live here. We all have an interest in quality content and quality journalism. Newspapers are essentially aggregations of geo-targeted content supported by advertising. The newspaper business is going through a very hard time because companies like Facebook and Google can deliver that geo-targeted audience without the content. John Lanchester, in a recent essay in the London Review of Books, and I would encourage you all to go Google it and read it. It's really very well done, talked about this. And his point is a relatively simple one. It's that for Facebook and Google, content doesn't matter. It's all about data and audience. That's their value proposition. It's not that they're, encouraging fake news. It's just that fake news is financially as valuable to them as real news. Because at the end of the day, it's the viewer that they're selling, not the content. Right, so this is demonstrated really strikingly by the organization ProPublica. Okay, I heard that bing. ProPublica showed how it was very easy to use anti-Semitic keywords to make an ad buy on Facebook. Now, there's no way that Mark Zuckerberg wants anti-Semitic keywords to be available on Facebook. But the normal operation of his business provides for that. And I don't mean to pick on Facebook. Google was shown by BuzzFeed to have allowed ads to be targeted to racist keywords. And I don't really mean to be picking on Facebook or Google. I think Google earlier today talked about how they have to do a better job of providing a brand-safe environment. And I have no doubt that they're operating in good faith in trying to do that. But I think fundamentally, it's not what they do. They disconnect content from advertising. They are focused on the viewer, on the person, not on the content. And so inevitably, when you disconnect those two things, there's going to be objectionable content that's available for an advertiser, and an ad's going to run in it. Okay. So I'm by nature an optimist, and I really do think that our industry can come together and find this right balance and work well. I think the first step is we need to collaborate, right? We need to start thinking about how we can work together to standardize, to provide a common data set across all of the media properties, to create a single integration point, right? One of the big advantages of Google and Facebook is you can go to Google and you can go to Facebook and you've taken care of 70% of your digital spend. So I think it behooves us to work together. There's a recent announcement from Comcast, which my soon-to-be former employer, Disney, is a part of, using blockchain technology so that everybody can answer a single question across all their data sets, which is, I think, a good step in the right direction. I think the other thing is we have to recognize that media companies compete on content. We don't compete on ad product. We don't compete on data. And so we can work together on ad product, and we can work together on data, even though we compete viciously on who's got the best content. And understanding that distinction should be the lens through which we filter all this collaboration. Okay, so my vision for the future of TV advertising has two tracks. The first is broad-based marketing with a primary place in media plans, driving greater sales, supporting fantastic content, making the world a better place, hooray. Hey, a guy can dream, right? The second has a scaled data offering through collaboration, associated again with that premium content, and made available to advertisers in a privacy-compliant way where the consumer has control and the exchange is transparent. Now, I know it sounds a little utopian, but, a guy can dream. And let's hope it works out that way. Thank you.